reflect on and your son. And we ask that you be with us and guide our thoughts and conversations. Your name we pray, amen. Okay. Is it Fred?
Clayton.
Yeah.
Claiborne.
Claiborne. You found something that you brought back from Vienna that you wanted to share with us. Why don't you say something?
When we were on a river cruise, one of the stops was Vienna, and the major cathedral in Vienna was the Imperial Church St. Stephen's Cathedral, which we toured. And after we did our little tour, I went to the bookstore and they had several things, but one was a collection of books by the Catholic Church of Austria. They're illustrated children's books, and they are depicting everyone as they would appear in Palestine. So I thought it might be interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Victoria.
Yeah, I thought that was fitting for a competition. Yeah, so he's passing it around. Okay, I'm gonna start here with the Roman Empire. Just get us going on this. This is the blue is the Roman Empire at the time of Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus from the Christmas story. Okay, so that's what the Roman Empire looked like with Augustus. And Augustus is a pivotal moment in Roman history. The period right before this was called the Late Republic, and it was very violent with civil wars and mob actions and Romans killing Romans. Julius Caesar was murdered in the Roman Senate, and Augustus is the one that settles that all down. He's actually a young boy when he gets started. He's about 19 years old when he begins his rise. And Augustus is a good ruler. He establishes what is known as the empire, where the emperor is in charge of everything. And it only looks like the Senate is really playing a role, but it's really the emperor. And he establishes laws and builds roads and stabilizes the Roman Empire. Immediately after Augustus, you got three bad emperors. Two of them are infants, Nero and Caligula. Nero is the one under which Paul probably was executed. And but the thing was, you had three incompetent rulers, but the government that Augustus set up continued to function and didn't fall apart. Following those three, you get four more, making five good, what are known as the five good emperors. Okay, and the five good emperors end about in the year 180, and then everything kind of goes to hell in a handbasket for a very long time. This period of the five good emperors is when early Christianity gets its start. And early Christianity is an illegal religion. The Jews got an exemption from Julius Caesar, where they did not have to make sacrifices to the Roman gods, as long as they made sacrifices to their god in the name of the emperor, and they prayed for the emperor in the temple, and they put the sacred Roman eagle on the Jewish temple of Jerusalem. Anytime that the Jews rose up against Rome, first thing that happened was the sacred Roman eagle comes off the temple, the sacrifices to their god for the emperor stops, and then there's trouble. But the the Christians did not get grandfathered into that. Christianity was a new religion. And to the Romans, a new religion can't be a true religion. So the Christians continually emphasize the Old Testament, and we're not a new religion. Okay, so that's part of the reason for that. Christianity was an illegal religion, but it wasn't the only one. There were lots of other illegal religions that the Romans didn't like. They didn't like the worship of Dionysus. They didn't like the priests that were up in Gaul. They didn't like a lot of new and foreign religions. But, however, on the other hand, the emperors really weren't interested in that. And the 5 good emperors pretty much just looked the other way, let people do what they were doing unless they caused trouble. If the Christians caused trouble, there was persecution. It tended to be occasional and it tended to be local. It was never empire-wide. The 5 good emperors really didn't care that much about them. If the Christians became impudent and disrespectful of the empire, they were to be killed. And one of the instances of that, which may have been the case, somewhat speculation, some evidence. You know probably of Justin Martyr. He was a teacher in Rome, had a following of students, and it may be that he went to the emperor and tried to convert him to be a Christian. So he got killed, and his students. And that was about the year 150. About the same time, up here in Lyon, France, the Christian community prospered, became leaders. They acquired jealousies and enemies. They prospered so much that the Christians owned slaves, and the slaves began telling stories on them. And so the mob ran through the streets of Lyon, just slaughtering Christians. They said the river ran red with their blood. It was pretty nasty. So there are occasions of persecution, but for the most part, the Roman Empire looks the other way, has other things they're worried about. That'll change in the late empire after one. Okay, now, place we're going to go is way off the beaten path here next. Over in Syria, this area through here is the Persian Empire. It is the only empire that has the ability to challenge Rome. And we're going to go to a frontier garrison town let's go here first. Yeah, let's talk about this. Okay, this is Caesar Augustus. This is the Christian Caesar Augustus. 20 BCE. And what I want to bring up here is the style of art. Okay? The style of art that the Greeks and the Romans are known for, and that you all, I'm pretty sure, know them for, is a certain style that we generally call classical. And the Greeks developed it, the Romans adopted it, and the Romans changed it in a couple of ways. One of them was they actually did actual human faces rather than a kind of idealized face. They did portraits. And they tended to prefer putting clothes on their statues. The Greeks did not. There's a lot of speculation for why Greeks did nude statues. And none of it's very interesting or insightful, I think. This is probably one of the early high points in the classical style of the Greeks. It's 480 BCE. It's quite old, and it's known as the Corinthian War. It's probably the best example. The word that the Greeks used to talk about this style is mimesis, and mimesis is kind of like our word imitation. Okay, so what they're trying to do with this art is to catch the surface appearances of things, to get what something really looks like. And they go to great lengths for that. I mean, look at the knees here. I mean, it just looks like a real knee. And something is lost in the way that we look at this, our experience of Greek and Roman art is it's all colorless, but it wasn't colorless. They painted the hair, lips, face, got a little color on it. The eye sockets are blank, but they had glass eyes in them. And if you see them with glass eyes, you can go to the Vatican. Vatican just has hundreds of these statues. And you see them with glass eyes, and it's just uncanny, because I mean, it looks like an actual face. And the nude, at least some of the nudes, I don't know about all, but the Greeks actually would put clothes on. They're sort of like Barbie dolls. And they would do this perfect body hair. In trying to imitate what the eye sees, getting the surface appearances of things, is what this is all about. Now, there's another part of this as well, and that's the mathematics, okay? When we think of art, we think of, oh, the artist had an experience and they're expressing themselves. Not so with classical, all right? You got certain mathematical rules. If the head is 1 unit, the body size will be 7 units. If the hand is 1 unit, that'll determine how many units the arm should be and the leg. It's all mathematically worked out with proportions on what the correct way is to do this, okay? And when we get in this early period, there is no Christian art. And we really don't know why. Because it starts about 200, about the year 200 or a little after that. And all of a sudden there's a lot of it. But what happens is when everything starts to go to hell in a handbasket for the Roman Empire, the art style changes. Okay? So the classical styles gradually disappear, and there's an overlap in there. But a different style of art emerges. So that's what we're going to look at. And when Christians start to do art, it's in this other mode. It's in this other mode. Now, because of some of the biases in the way that Western art has been taught, the conventional way to approach this was that the Romans forgot how to draw. They lost their skills. They couldn't draw anymore. It's part of the disintegration of civilization. But in a period where you've got Picasso that can draw like Michelangelo, but chooses to work at a different style, it's harder to say that, okay? It's harder to say that. And so you look at it for what was this art trying to do that is different from what the classical styles do. We have almost no painting, almost no pictures from the Greek and Roman period. And so we tend to imagine that period as cities without color and statues without color. And then they discovered Pompeii back in the 19th century. And oh my gosh, there's color everywhere. And in Ohio, where I grew up in the pre-Civil War period, every house had to be painted with Pompeii red. That became the thing. And you were really cool if you had Pompeii red in your living room. But I mean, you look at the face here, and so many of the things that the Renaissance just rediscovered, started doing, you've got light and shadow on the face, giving a kind of depth to the features. You've got the beautiful attention to the curls of her hair. She puts the stylus to her lips as she's thinking about maybe what she's going to write next. I mean, it's really just they had color, they had paintings, but hardly any of it survives. When we see it, it's really startling. Okay, this is a map of Christian expansion. The green is not Christianity. The green is the Roman Empire. The red parts are Christianity at the time of Constantine, when Constantine converts to Christianity. Notice how little of the empire is Christian this time, okay? It's focused in the cities. There's very little in the country. Pagan is a word that means a country bumpkin, okay? And there, we won't get into this, but Egypt is different. Egypt is centered in the schools, not the bishops, and may not have even had bishops for quite a while. So the flavor of Christianity in Egypt is quite different. But there are certain places where it seems like there are certain territories. Now, okay, this is that place I said we were going to. It's called Dura Europus. Some of you may have run into it before. Probably most of you have not. Don't worry about that. It's kind of obscure, but it does come up. It's pretty widely known for people that study this stuff. And it's on the frontier of the Roman and Persian empires. It lasted from about 165 to 257 when it was destroyed by the Persians. All right. And there is an embankment above the Euphrates River so that they didn't need to build a wall around here because they're protected by that high embankment, but there are walls coming around the city here. About 5,000 people at most, not that many. It had a lot of pagan temples. Some of them were local gods, some of them were some of the Roman gods, and a variety of things, lots of pagan temples. But surprisingly, there's a Jewish synagogue here and a Christian house church. The Christian house church is the only one we have ever found. Okay? And the synagogue is very striking and different from what we would normally expect. There's what the Christian house church looked like some time ago, and the synagogue. The Syria took all of the artwork from the synagogue and put it in the museum in Damascus. And I'm assuming the same thing happened with the Christian church, though I haven't read that. It was discovered after World War I. British patrol was driving up the Euphrates, decided to sit for lunch, and somebody saw some paintings and being uncovered in the sand. There's several surprising things here. One is the synagogue is just bursting with images. Jews aren't supposed to have images. And the other is that the Christians worshiped openly. Now, back here to the time period, the Christian church is 233 to 256. This is in that long decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And this is when the persecutions get serious. At this time, no emperor is able to stay emperor for very long at all. Nearly all of them die in battle with their own generals. They cannot put any policy in place for very long because they can't stay in office for very long. And very often what happens is one emperor will decide the reason we're having all these problems is because we've forsaken the gods of Rome and we need to get back to that and do away with these new religions. And then he dies in battle, and the next emperor decides, oh, the enemy is my enemies, my friends, and they befriend the Christians.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of back and forth. Nobody can maintain any policy for very long. The Christian house church is right during that tumultuous period. There are several European-wide enforced persecutions. There are lots of stories of heroic martyrs, but sadly enough, a lot of Christians went and sacrificed and got their card stamped. You had to have papers showing that you sacrificed to the Roman Emperor, and some of those have survived. The synagogue and the church were preserved because of the Prussian attack and destruction of the city, oddly enough. The Prussians are known for their sappers. And sappers, they're miners who would dig underneath the city walls And if they had explosives, that's probably what they did, but they didn't. So they would mine under the city wall so that the wall would collapse. You can imagine what a dangerous task that would be. The protection against that was that you filled all the buildings along the wall with sand and rubble and rock, reinforcing the wall, making it difficult for them to do that. So the Christian church is here, right along the wall. And when the Persians were getting ready to attack, they filled it with sand and rubble. The synagogue is here, and they did the same with the synagogue. So they were preserved. It was also a Mithraic temple. It wasn't just something they did to the Jews and the Christians. It was also a Mithraic temple that was filled in like that. This is the Jewish synagogue. And when they started digging down here, they assumed it was a Christian church because of all the paintings. And then they got to the Torah niche and said, oh, that's not a Christian church. There are 3 levels of pictures, 7 meters tall, 7 meters, that's, I don't know, a yardstick would be 3 feet, 21 feet, something like that. I mean, it's a lot. 58 pictures, and that's only 60% of what was originally. Here's another picture of it here. Now, the Christian house church doesn't have the resources of this Jewish community, so it's not as lavish as this, but this is pretty lavish. Now, notice the painting style. It is not classic. Okay, it is not trying to get the navel right and how everything looks. Fighting baby Moses, and some of the ladies here are dressed in the Persian style rather than the Roman style. And they're on that frontier boundary area. This is kind of interesting. Moses and Aaron parting the Red Sea. And of course, the difficulty in painting until you get motion pictures is you can't get action, you can't get sequence or narrative going. But often the way they would do that was the same way the comic strips do. You've got panels. Over here, you've got the Egyptian army. Notice the legs don't necessarily match up with anybody up above. They just forgot how to. You've got the Egyptian army and Aaron are much smaller than Moses. They're not trying to get what things look like. There are other things that are more important. Moses is more important, so we make him bigger. Okay? Aaron is more important than the Egyptians, so we make him bigger than the Egyptians. Okay, they're not trying to give you what things look like. Egyptian army here, going across, fish left with the water gone, and then over here they drown. And look what's coming in from the top. Not supposed to draw pictures of God, but you got his hands coming in from the top right there. God is reaching right into the scene, right into the history. God is there with them. This is Aaron and bringing sacrifices to the temple. Aaron's the most important one, so we make him bigger. I don't think he could even fit inside that temple. You've got, notice, many of the characters are in pants. That's a Persian thing. Romans didn't do that. It's a Persian thing. So you've got Persian stuff going on there. You've got a style of art influenced by Persia, but is moving away from the classical styles of the Greeks and the Romans that we all notice. The proportions are not important. Or they are important, but they use proportions differently. All right. There are other synagogues with biblical art. I've never tried to look them up. I don't think they're anything as spectacular as what was found at Europa. And then the house church. Okay. Now, This is not a little apartment hidden away in a small town. This is an upper class Roman house. Maybe not a big palace by any means, but it's an upper class Roman house. There is something about this image and the book I've read on it that I don't quite get. And so I'm going to suggest that maybe the picture is wrong, but maybe someday I'll find out that I'm wrong. This courtyard that you see here and here would have been open to the sky. Okay. And when we were in Florence, the one time my wife and I traveled to Europe, it's kind of life-changing, actually. We were walking through old Florence, and Mary Beth, we're looking at the houses, and Mary Beth says, "They don't have any front yards. There's no porch. What's going on here?" Well, they didn't build houses the way we do, with a front yard, welcoming front yard, and a porch, and you go up and you can knock on the door, and there's a welcome mat out there. They didn't do that. The houses of the Romans were fortresses because of the rioting and the mobs that would occur out in the cities. And so you built the house like a fortress, and inside was a courtyard open to the sky, and you had plants in the garden in the courtyard, and its beauty was different than the beauty that we look for in a house. Okay. A wall was removed over here for an assembly, and they could fit about 30 people or so. So it wasn't very large, or maybe they had 2-3 services on Sunday, I don't know. There are steps here going to the upper floors. There's a study area here, teaching area, and the entrance is over here, and no windows on the outside. Maybe at the second floor there might be. Light and air comes through the courtyard. So if it's closed in like this, that house makes no sense. You've got no windows on the outside. You've got no light or air coming in through the courtyard. That had to have been open to the air, I think. This right here is the baptistry, and that's where we're going to look. Okay. Oh, yeah, I tossed this in, something from Paul. When you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. It's probably an informal community. I mean, there's some formality already developing with the episcopacy and some of the schools, but it's probably pretty informal, small thing. They came together, they prayed, they ate, they supported each other, much like the pastor was talking in the sermon this morning. This is the baptistry, and it's the only part we ever see. It may be the only part that really survived well. The colors are really vibrant from what you would expect. I think the building committee here would have a problem if we wanted to use these colors. You've got some kind of colored stone here. You've got blue and stars in the ceiling, which are pretty common. This sort of purple with grapes and wheat, of course, Christian symbol. You have the women coming to the tomb. Here is how that's usually explained. And then this right here, this sort of half circle area, becomes called a tympanum later. I don't know what they would call it here. That's where I want to look. There's a picture of Jesus in there. It has not survived time well. It's hard to make out, but it's probably the earliest picture of Jesus from the Christian faith. And here it is. Now that I could make out before, it wasn't until recently that I ran into this sketch, which showed other things. So these are sheep. Never figured out. I do not know what this thing is here. What they're showing seems like Adam and Eve and a tree. That could well be. Adam was Christ was the second Adam, okay, and Adam's fall and the tree and all of that. Now, the way that Christ is presented is as the Good Shepherd. And this becomes pretty standard. He's got a lamb or sheep around his shoulders, his hands holding the legs, and the source that I got this from said something that I'm not real sure about and thinking about. The baptism seal was viewed as like the sheep's brand. You know, brand sheep that ruins her coat. So I'm like, I don't know. But Jesus, this became, we all know about the ichthus fish. That's also true. But Jesus, the Good Shepherd, becomes the primary symbol of Christianity, not the cross, but Jesus is the Good Shepherd here during this early period. 70% of Vera Europos was destroyed by ISIS. They went through, now, when you're talking a village or a town of about 5,000 people, that's not that big, but to carry out painstaking, careful archaeological digs and documenting where everything was found and what it is, that's slow work. Of course, they did the church and the synagogue first, but they still had a lot of the town to do. They identified certain temples and other things, but they still had a lot of dig. What ISIS did was come in, grab everything they could sell on the black market, and bulldoze the rest. And we watched them do it by satellite. So the whole thing's been bulldozed. Who knows where all that stuff went to or what finds might have occurred. That just recently happened. All right, late Roman Empire. This is that long decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It begins at the end of the 5 good emperors, 180. Marcus Aurelius was the last of the 5 good emperors. And I date it here kind of funny. You've got a first period, 180 to 285, which is bad enough. You get a brackets here where 2 strong emperors stabilize everything for a short while. That's Diocletian and Constantine. Diocletian, we'll talk about. The first part here is really a lot of really nasty civil wars. It gets stabilized by something called the Savannah Dynasty. Don't worry, unless you really know Roman history, you probably never went into this. The Savannah Dynasty, 193 to 235, and they stabilize things a little bit. They are not Roman. They're Carthaginian family, which is the enemy of the Roman Empire. And they're now the rulers of Rome. They dislike Roman culture. Italy becomes ruled just like the conquered provinces of the rest of the empire. It receives no special treatment. And they follow the policy of making sure they make the army rich and don't worry about anything else. Okay, and that was the way they governed. Caracalla, this guy here, Gibbon calls him the common enemy of all mankind. It's really the Savannah Dynasty that gets blamed a lot for the fall of the Roman Empire, but there are a lot of reasons. He murders his brothers. He's known for cruelties, and at least some indications are they hated the Roman Empire. They were friendly to Christianity. and so there are occasions where it seems like Origen and some others had interviews with their queens, and they had some interest in Christianity and that. After them, 235. After them, things get really bad. It's called the Anarchy. 235 and 284. There are 20 emperors in 50 years. Almost all of them die violently. Usually they're fighting their own generals. We have German invasions deep into the empire as the Roman armies are fighting each other. The army raided Roman cities rather than protecting them to keep themselves going. And Rome rebuilt its walls in the year 271 to protect it from the Roman armies. Rome rebuilt its walls in 271. Leaders of the cities abandoned their positions. It was too dangerous. Farmers were actually abandoning their land and no longer planting. It was just too dangerous. And when the Roman Empire does actually fall with the German invasions, there are very few Romans that stand up and fight for the empire. I mean, the empire just wasn't working anymore. There were some guerrilla uprisings of the Romans against the Germans up in Gaul, but for the most part, Rome just wasn't worth saving anymore by the time that happened. It's in this anarchy that we get the first empire-wide systematic persecutions of Christians. And they can't carry out the policy because they can't stay in office long enough. This is Philip the Arab. He was not a very nice guy, but he was friendly to the Christians, okay? 244 to 49. Sounds like he ruled a long time, but he was fighting others that were also claiming to be emperor. He murdered the 19-year-old emperor. He's a junior officer at the palace guard. And to make everybody happy with him being emperor, he offered huge games in the Colosseums, which was a pagan thing to do, but he favored Christianity. And there are German invasions. He's killed in battle with his own general. Decius comes up 249 to 51. Only a couple of years, he puts in place empire-wide persecution of Christians. You have to make sacrifices at the Roman temple to the Roman gods. You have to get a paper saying that you've done that. You have to hand over the Christian scriptures for destruction. He gets killed in battle with the Gauls. He can't carry out that policy for very long. Valerian comes in place. He starts a persecution late in his rule, and then he dies. Jewish catacombs, the catacombs in Rome starts as Jewish. And here's something that's really hard for me to grasp. How could they be doing all of this huge engineering project when Christianity is illegal? And I mean, you can't do this in secret. 80% of the catacombs were built after Christianity was legal. Okay, so it wasn't as big an affair. It is actually just a huge thing by the time they're done with it. It is funerary art, and it has to be remembered. Okay, it is art that is about death and dying. That's kind of the focus here. This is a place where they laid corpses. Judaism and Christianity did not burn corpses because of the bodily resurrection, and so they laid the corpses out. It stank, as you might imagine. It was damp and wet, and I have never run into anybody explain to me how they did all this painting in the dark and what they would be able to see in that dark. The cave paintings of really early Europe, that was all done in pitch black with torches. I've never had anybody explain how this happened here. Of course, it's all lit up by electric lights now, and you can see it well. Christians started using it in the 2nd century. That's the 100s. But on a small scale, it was mostly Jewish. And it's all outside of Rome. Rome was a pagan city. There was no room for anything like this in Rome. And so when Christians started building churches, it was outside the city. When they did this. It was outside the city. And just wonderful pictures, paintings. And we have so few paintings from the Roman period at all. But there are quite a few with the catacombs. This is Christ teaching the apostles. Notice it's not the long flowing hair that we're used to. And it's not the kind of robes that we're used to seeing Christ in here. He has looks like maybe he has a book. And this one is one that I'll come back to several times. It's the most common image of Jesus, as I said before, is that Good Shepherd. Now, the Good Shepherd is just everywhere within Christian art. And I have taught this the way that it's generally taught, and now I've run into a book that's kind of making me rethink things a little bit. What's usually said about this is that the Good Shepherd is the kind of early church, the church which does not have political power, does not have the state behind it, does not rule. And this is sort of that peasant Jesus, peaceful, passive, man of the earth and the people. Constantine converts to Christianity. The Christian faith changes. Nature, function, everything, because it becomes the state religion. Okay, so Christianity changes. Now, you can find lots of people that teach it, early Christianity good, later Christianity bad, and all that. That's too simple a thing. That's not the way to think about it. But increasingly, Jesus becomes a king sitting on a throne with a book of law in his hand, giving judgment like a king. Okay, so that is the way that's usually taught. It's the way that I've taught it for decades. And then I find something else. I've got the book up here someplace. But this gal goes back, and good Lord, the detail work that she did. She starts in 3000 BCE and goes all the way up into the Middle Ages, studying shepherds and shepherd imagery all through that time period, and ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Greeks, the Romans, and nobody would want that much detail. But it's kind of interesting, since I talked about it, I was interested in her. And one of the things that she insists on and says is, we got this King Jesus on a throne and shepherd, not quite correct. The shepherd was also a shepherd king. The shepherd was also a warrior. David, when he went to fight Goliath, put away Saul's weapons and went out to fight Goliath with the weapons of a shepherd. Okay, the shepherd was a warrior also, and the shepherd was a king also. And the kings from Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt all describe themselves as shepherds. Okay, so shepherd isn't quite as univocal as all that. But she does say, when Christians pick up the shepherd, they do something entirely different with it, which does kind of fit that nice shepherd of the people thing. Because when the Christians pick up the shepherd, Christ is not only the shepherd, but he's also the lamb, the one who sacrificed. And boy, that adds, that complexifies the whole thing of what that image means. So when she says that, then I think, okay, she's given back some of what I thought she was taking away. So I'm still kind of pondering this. You have Christ the Good Shepherd in the center. Now, this is not classical art. This is not intended as a painting or a portrait of Jesus. It is a symbol. Okay? And it's an art that speaks through symbols rather than trying to get the navel right and the surface appearances of things. Rather than trying to give us a portrait of what Jesus actually looked like, what's more important is what's invisible to the eye. What's really real in this late Roman art and in the medieval art is not what the eye can see, but it's what's invisible to the eye. The spiritual realities are more real than what you can see with the eye. Kind of with me on that? Okay. So it is not like the classical. It's not like the Corinthian boy where we're trying to get the knees right and make them look real, and you can see it's an art that speaks in symbols and symbolic meaning. And so it doesn't look like we think a picture ought to look often because we're so steeped in Renaissance art. But if you think of Picasso and some of those migrants, he just spit on the floor. That's not pretty. Art has to be pretty. And yeah, he would tell me that. But now, the Good Shepherd here. It's hard. It is a very complex symbol, very complex set of meanings with it. Sometimes, like here, I think it is not even pretending to be Jesus Christ. It's a symbol. Other times, it shows the Good Shepherd, and it's real obvious that they are doing Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So it's sort of both and that's the way symbols work, okay? It's multivalent, as they say. You got sheep. Jesus is wearing a Roman toga, short hair, clean shave, okay? Or the shepherd, at least, and sheep around at his feet. These figures here are called orets, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. Usually they are female. The hands are outstretched, sort of in that posture that you see the pastor when he's doing the Lord's Supper, bringing the glory of God down. Okay, they're usually, it's a worshipful pose, standing before God. These images here are Old Testament images, and the two there, we'll talk about the different kinds of symbols. One of them is typology, which you're probably more familiar with than you might know. And this is Jonah and the whale, both of these. Jonah and the whale. Jonah was a type of Christ in the Old Testament because Jonah went into the fish for 3 days as Jesus went into the tomb for 3 days. Jonah comes out of the fish and rises as Jesus rises from the tomb. Jonah is a type of Christ in the Old Testament. We are talking death here and resurrection. It's a burial site. It's funereal. And those kind of images were probably very profound for the people bringing their loved ones in there. This is a death and resurrection of Jonah, a kind of Christ who dies and resurrects. The expectation, why we lay out the body here, is an expectation of the resurrection, the hope for life to come. It is funereal. Here's Jonah getting tossed over. There's the fish. That is that picture right there. That's probably a good place for us to stop. Oh, there's the book on the shepherd. I knew that would come up. The shepherd she puts on here, that is Christ the Good Shepherd, but this shepherd is sitting on a throne and dressed in purple. It's sort of that blend of things, where things are going. Okay. Magda, could you pray for us?
And Jen.
Oh, but yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so terrible.
Father God, thank you for this opportunity to learn new, to understand, and to see differences historically and otherwise, but always with the idea that people have been close to you in so many different cultures. And we thank you. Thank you for our time together. And we ask you to go with each of us through this new week. Amen.
Thank you, sorry.
And that, anyway, before you hit end meeting for all, it's in recording.